The silence in the Al-Shati district was a heavy, expensive thing. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence of insulation, thick walls, security gates, and the low, constant hum of industrial air conditioning fighting a war against the Red Sea humidity. I woke before the sun. My internal clock had been calibrated by 20 years of fear and discipline. My feet touched the marble floor, and the cold shock traveled up my spine. A familiar morning greeting. In this house, everything was hard, polished, and cold. The crystal chandeliers overhead, even in the dim pre-dawn light, looked like frozen tears suspended in the air. I moved to the washroom for wudu. The ritual was muscle memory. My mind didn't need to participate. Hands 3 times, mouth, nostrils, face. The water was frigid, biting at my skin. Wash the arms to the elbows, wipe the head, wash the feet. I watched the water swirl down the drain, wishing briefly, as I often did, that it could wash away the numbness in my chest along with the sleep. But the water only cleaned the skin. The dust inside remained. Down the hallway, the tap of a cane against the tile announced her arrival. My grandmother. She was a woman carved from the bedrock of the desert, dressed eternally in black. Her face a map of stern lines, her eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "Fajr, Layla," she murmured, her voice rasping like dry parchment. "I am ready, grandmother." We walked to the private mosque within our compound. I unrolled my prayer rug facing Mecca. I bowed. I prostrated. My forehead touched the ground. I recited the words of submission, the Arabic flowing from my tongue like a river I had memorized but never swam in. Allahu Akbar. God is great. I said it. I knew I should feel it. I should feel the awe, the trembling fear of judgment, the hope of paradise. But as I rose and fell in the rhythm of the prayer, I felt only the texture of the carpet and the emptiness of the room. I was a doll performing a dance. Later that morning, the sun began to bake the corniche outside, turning the sea into a blinding sheet of blue turquoise. I retreated to my bedroom, my sanctuary, and my cell. My laptop sat open on my desk. Business management, a degree chosen by my father, paid for by his accounts, for a career I would likely never have. I muted the microphone, killed the camera, and let the professor's voice drone on in the background while I turned to my real life, the digital one. I picked up my phone, 500,000 followers. On the screen, I was perfect. I scrolled through my own feed, looking at a stranger. There was a photo of my hand, decorated in intricate henna, resting casually on a Chanel bag. 15,000 likes. Another of the sunset from our terrace, accompanied by a quote about patience and modesty. 20,000 likes. "You are such an inspiration, Layla." One comment read, "The perfect balance of deen and dunya," said another. If they could see me now? I sat on the edge of my bed, the perfect Muslim girl, feeling like a hollowed-out gourd. I had curated a museum of a life. I fasted. I gave charity. I covered every inch of skin. I avoided every haram thing. I had checked every box on the list of salvation. Yet I felt as though I were starving at a banquet. Dinner that evening was a formal affair, as it always was. The clinking of silver against china was the only conversation until my father cleared his throat. The sound was subtle, but it commanded the room like a gavel strike. He did not look at me. He focused on cutting his lamb, the knife slicing cleanly through the meat. "Layla," he said. His voice was level, devoid of question marks. "I have spoken with your uncle. It is decided. You will marry Nasir bin Salah." The air left the room. My mother smiled. A reflex, quick and anxious. My grandmother nodded, a slow, approving dip of her chin. "Nasir," I whispered. The name tasted like dust. My cousin. A man 12 years my senior. A man who spoke in monosyllables and looked at women as if they were slightly inconvenient furniture. "It is a good match," my father continued, finally looking up. His eyes were dark, impenetrable. He is ministry. It secures the family ties. The wedding will be in 6 months. I looked at my mother. She busied herself with the rice, refusing to meet my gaze. She knew. She knew the suffocation. She had lived it. And now she was relieved that it was my turn to carry the weight. 6 months, I repeated. It is enough time, my grandmother interjected, her voice sharp. You have preparations, the dress, the gold. You must be ready to run a household. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, perfectly obedient. Inside, a scream was building. A high, piercing shriek that wanted to shatter the crystal glasses and the marble floors. But I swallowed it. I swallowed it just like I swallowed the lamb and the rice. Alhamdulillah, I said softly. Praise be to God. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. My life was being arranged like the furniture in the majlis, positioned for the comfort of others, with no thought to the object itself. I was 20 years old, and my life was effectively over. The weeks that followed the engagement announcement were a blur of gold thread and forced smiles. My life had become a production, and I was merely the prop. It was my mother who suggested the final touch to my public persona. Charity, she said one afternoon, examining a swatch of silk for the wedding reception. It softens the image. Layla, a bride who serves the poor is a bride the community respects. And think of the Instagram engagement. It was a transaction. The poor would receive rice and oil. I would receive social capital. It was cynical. It was hollow. And it was exactly what was expected of me. She arranged for me to volunteer at a women's shelter in Al-Balad, the historic heart of Jeddah. This was not the Jeddah of glass towers and neon lights where I lived. This was the ancient city, built of coral stone and sea mud, a place where the alleys were narrow and the shadows were deep. My driver, silent and discreet, stopped the Lexus at the edge of the district. The transition was violent. I stepped out of the air-conditioned silence into a wall of heat. The air here smelled of turmeric, roasting coffee, car exhaust, and the salt of the nearby sea. It was loud, a cacophony of shopkeepers shouting, scooters whining, and the call to prayer echoing off crumbling walls. I adjusted my designer abaya, clutching my handbag tightly. I felt ridiculous. I was a diamond set in rough clay, completely out of place. The shelter was a dying building. The paint curled from the walls like sunburnt skin, revealing the gray concrete beneath. Inside, the air conditioning wheezed, coughing out lukewarm air that smelled of old dust. The women sitting on the mismatched chairs looked up as I entered. Their eyes were dark and heavy, carrying stories I could not begin to imagine: abuse, abandonment, poverty. I offered a stiff smile. I handed out the heavy bags of high-quality rice my driver brought in. I posed for a photo, careful to angle my face just so. Click. Evidence secured. I wanted to leave. The misery here was too raw. It threatened to stain the hem of my perfect life. But then, I met Miriam. She came out of a back office, wiping her hands on a simple gray tunic. She was Egyptian, perhaps in her mid-30s, with a face that carried no makeup, only a strange, luminous calm. You must be Layla, she said. Her Arabic carried the soft, rhythmic lilt of Cairo. Thank you for the food. It will feed 5 families for a month. She didn't look at my expensive shoes. She didn't look at the expensive watch on my wrist. She looked directly into my eyes, and for a terrifying second, I felt she could see the vacuum inside my chest. Come, she said, gesturing to the small office. Drink tea with me. I should have said no. I should have checked the time and left. But her presence was like gravity. I followed her. The office was the size of a closet, cluttered with paperwork and smelling of mint and cheap paper. She poured tea into a small glass cup. Tell me, Layla, she asked, sitting back. Beyond the rice and the photos, who are you? What brings you joy? I opened my mouth to give the rehearsed answer: family, faith, service, but the words died in my throat. She wasn't asking for the script. She was waiting for the truth. I stammered. I'm getting married soon. That is what is happening to you. she corrected gently, blowing on her tea. That is not who you are. What makes your heart beat? Child. Silence stretched between us. I realized, with a jolt of panic, that I didn't know. I liked the idea of things. I liked the approval of things. But Joy was a foreign country I had never visited. I don't know, I whispered, the admission slipping out before I could catch it. Miriam didn't judge. She didn't offer a platitude about gratitude or Allah's will. She just nodded, her eyes warm and unhurried. To search is good. It is better to know you are empty than to pretend you are full. I left that day confused. I returned to my marble palace, to the wedding planners discussing flower arrangements and the stiff, awkward phone calls with Nasir, who asked about my day like he was auditing a bank statement. Fine, I would tell him everything is fine. But I went back. Tuesday and Thursday. At first, I told myself it was for the photos. But soon, the camera stayed in my bag. I stopped wearing my most expensive perfumes. I went because, in that crumbling building in Al-Balad, amidst the heat and the dust, I felt the only breath of fresh air in my entire life. It was Miriam. She worked 12-hour days for pennies. She lived in a tiny apartment. She had no husband, no children, no status. By the metrics of my world, she was a failure. She should have been miserable. She should have been bitter. But she was the happiest person I had ever met. It wasn't a loud, laughing happiness. It was a deep, river-like peace. When the air conditioning broke, she didn't curse. She opened the windows and made jokes about the sauna. When a desperate woman screamed in anger, Miriam didn't shout back. She held her hands and spoke in a voice that lowered the temperature of the room. She had a secret. I could smell it on her like a fragrance. One afternoon, a month into my volunteering, the pressure of the wedding finally cracked me. My mother had spent 3 hours critiquing my weight for the dress fitting. Nasir had called to inform me, not ask me that we would be moving to Riyadh immediately after the wedding. I felt the walls of the cage welding shut. I walked into Miriam's office, closed the door, and burst into tears. She didn't rush to hush me. She poured the tea. She handed me a tissue. Talk, she said. And I did. I told her about the suffocating luxury. I told her about the husband I didn't know and didn't love. I told her about the prayers that felt like talking to a ceiling fan. I told her about the crown in paradise I was supposed to earn, and how heavy it felt before I even put it on. I do everything right, I sobbed, the mascara running down my face. I pray, I fast, I obey. Why do I feel like I am dying? Miriam sat still, her hands resting on the desk. She looked at me with an expression of profound sorrow and profound love. Layla, she said softly, you are trying to buy peace with currency that has no value in the kingdom of God. You are searching for a love that is not conditional on your performance. She leaned forward. The air in the tiny room seemed to shift, becoming charged, electric. I know this emptiness, she whispered. I lived it for 25 years in Cairo. I did the rituals. I wore the veil. I feared the judgment. I looked up, sniffing. What changed? Miriam took a deep breath, as if she were about to step off a cliff. She looked at the door to ensure it was closed, then locked her eyes on mine. I met someone, she said. 7 years ago. I met someone who paid my debt so I wouldn't have to keep earning it. A husband, I asked, confused. She smiled, a sad, beautiful smile. No, not a man. I met Isa. I met Jesus. The name hung in the air between us, Jesus. My blood ran cold. The tears stopped instantly, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. In Saudi Arabia, that name spoken in that way was not just different. It was dangerous. It was forbidden. Miriam was not just a coordinator. She was a Christian. She was an apostate. And I was sitting in her office, listening to treason. I stood up so fast my chair scraped violently against the floor, a harsh screech that sounded like a warning. Every alarm bell installed in my psyche by my grandmother, by my teachers, by my culture, began ringing at once. Apostate, deceiver, enemy. The words were not just thoughts. They were physical impulses urging me to run, to shout, to cover my ears. "You are a Christian," I breathed, the accusation hanging heavy in the air. Miriam did not flinch. She did not look like a predator. She looked like a woman who had found water in a desert and was simply pointing to the well. "I am a follower of the truth, Layla, and the truth is a person." I grabbed my handbag, my knuckles turning white. "I should report you. You know what they do to people like you. You know the law." "I know," she said softly. Her calm was terrifying. If she had argued, if she had been defensive, I could have dismissed her, but her peace was an immovable object. "I am not asking you to believe me, Layla. I am only answering the question your heart has been asking." I turned and fled. I walked out of the shelter, past the women with their weary eyes, into the blinding afternoon sun of Al-Balad. The heat hit me like a physical blow, but inside, I was freezing. My driver opened the door, and I collapsed into the leather seat, trembling. "Drive." I wanted to scream. "Drive away from this. Drive back to the safety of the walls." For 2 weeks, I did not return. I threw myself into the role of the perfect daughter with the desperation of a drowning woman clutching at driftwood. I prayed longer. I attended a lecture at a mosque in Al-Rauda, sitting on the plush carpet for 2 hours while a female scholar spoke about the fires of Jahannam. She described the punishments for disobedience with vivid, terrifying precision. "Submit," she said. "Obey, fear." I sat there, surrounded by weeping women, and felt nothing. No, that is not true. I felt a cold, expanding dread. The God she described was a cosmic accountant, tallying my debts, waiting for a slip. Then the slip came, but not from me. It was a Tuesday evening when my phone lit up with the message. The family group chat. A string of frantic emojis, then the text that stopped my heart. "Fatima, my cousin, my childhood shadow. We used to steal dates from the kitchen and whisper about which boys we would never marry. She was 22, newlywed, her life just beginning. A tire blowout on the highway to Mecca. A rollover. Instant. The funeral was a haze of black fabric and suffocating incense. We sat in the women's section of her family's home, a sea of mourners. The air was thick with the sound of reciting the rhythmic, hypnotic chanting of the Quran. "It is Allah's will," an aunt whispered, patting Fatima's mother's hand. "She is in a better place," another said. "To him we belong, and to him we return." I looked at the floor, fighting the urge to scream. Do you know I wanted to ask them? Do you really know she is in a better place? Or is that just what we say to survive the horror? Fatima had been good. She prayed. She covered. But was it enough if the scales were real? Had she done enough? The uncertainty gnawed at me. I looked at the women around me, my mother, my grandmother, and realized they were all just hoping. No one knew. We were all walking a tightrope over a canyon, blindfolded. That night, lying in my bed, the silence of the house felt like a tomb. I was terrified of dying, but more than that, I was terrified of living this way, empty, fearful, performing for a God who seemed to demand everything and offer no assurance in return. The next morning, driven by a grief that felt like madness, I told my driver to take me to Al-Balad. Miriam was there. When she saw me, she didn't ask where I had been. She didn't ask why I hadn't reported her. She saw the dark circles under my eyes, the tremor in my hands. "Fatima is dead," I said, my voice breaking. Miriam pulled me into the office and shut the door. I told her everything: the funeral, the fear, the emptiness of the condolences. "I don't know where she is." "Miriam," I whispered, tears finally spilling over. "And I don't know where I am going. I am trying so hard, but it's never enough." Miriam reached across the desk and took my hands. Her grip was warm, solid. "It is never enough," she said gently. "That is the truth, Layla. We can never be good enough to bridge the gap between us and God. That is why He came to us." She spoke of God not as a distant king, but as a father. She spoke of a love that didn't wait for me to be perfect, but loved me while I was still broken. "Show me," I said. The words came out before I could stop them. "You said you read a book. Show me where it says this." Miriam hesitated. She knew the danger. If I was caught with Christian scripture, it was a crime. If she was caught giving it to me, it was a death sentence. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk. She pulled out a simple black notebook. It looked like a university journal. Innocuous. Plain. But when she opened the cover, the pages inside were not blank. They were printed with Arabic text, dense and beautiful. "This is the Injil," she whispered. "The Gospel. I have glued the cover of a notebook over it to disguise it." She slid it across the desk. It sat there between us like a loaded weapon. "Read it," she said. "Start with Matthew. Just read what Jesus said about himself. Don't listen to the imams. Don't listen to me, listen to him." My hand hovered over the book. To touch it was treason. To take it was madness. I took it. I slipped it into my purse, beneath my wallet and my phone. The weight of it seemed to pull my shoulder down. I left the shelter walking quickly, expecting the ground to open up, expecting a lightning bolt. But there was only the sun and the dust. That night, inside the compound, the hours dragged. I waited until the house settled into its deep, air-conditioned sleep. I waited until the lights under my parents' door went dark. I locked my bedroom door. Then I propped a chair against it, a futile gesture, but it made me feel safer. I turned off the main lights, leaving only a small bedside lamp that cast a pool of gold on the marble floor. I pulled the book from under my mattress. My hands shook so hard I could barely turn the page. "Bismillah," I whispered out of habit, "in the name of God." I opened to the Gospel of Matthew. I expected blasphemy. I expected to read words that insulted God. Instead, I found a genealogy, names, history. It felt grounded. I read about the birth of Isa, born of a virgin, just as the Quran said. Okay, I thought, this is safe. But then I turned the page to chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." The words were not commands. They were not threats of hellfire. They were beatitudes, blessings. Jesus was speaking to the broken, the sad, the empty. He was speaking to me. I read on, voracious, starving. "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they?" Father. The word stopped me cold. In all my years of religious education, I had 99 names for Allah: the Mighty, the Avenger, the King, the Creator, but never Father. To call God Father was forbidden. It implied a physical relationship. It was shirk. But as I read the words of Jesus, it didn't feel like blasphemy. It felt like an invitation. It felt like coming in from the cold. I sat on the floor, my back against the bed, reading until the words blurred. For the first time in my life, God did not feel like a storm on the horizon. He felt like the air in the room. I closed the book only when the first gray light of dawn touched the window. I hid it back under the mattress, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and a strange, illicit joy. I was harboring a fugitive in my room, and for the first time since Fatima died, I wasn't afraid of the dark. For the next 2 weeks, I lived as a ghost haunting my own life. By day, I was the dutiful bride-to-be. I stood on velvet podiums, while seamstresses pinned expensive French lace against my waist, their mouths full of needles, muttering about waistlines and hems. I nodded at flower arrangements. I smiled at my mother's anxious excitement, but my mind was elsewhere. It was locked in a drawer beneath my mattress, wrapped in a black cover. The nights became my only reality. I would wait for the house to sink into silence, the rhythm of the air conditioning counting the seconds until I was safe. Then, I would descend into the text. I moved from Matthew to John. If Matthew was a gentle stream, John was the deep ocean, dark and terrifyingly vast. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I stared at the Arabic script until the letters blurred. The Word was God. My entire upbringing rebelled against this sentence. Shirk, the greatest sin. Associating partners with Allah. The Quran was clear: God is one. He begets not, nor is he begotten. Jesus was a prophet, a man of dust and breath like Adam. But John claimed he was the architect of the universe wrapped in skin. I wanted to close the book. I wanted to throw it across the room and wash my hands of the blasphemy. But the authority in the text held me down. It didn't sound like a fable. It didn't sound like the poetry of the Quran. It sounded like a witness statement. I read on, encountering a Jesus who shattered every category I had for a prophet. He didn't just teach the law. He claimed to be the fulfillment of it. He stood in the temple courts and faced a mob holding stones, ready to execute a woman caught in adultery. I knew this scene. I knew the law. In my world, the stones would fly. Justice demanded it. Purity demanded it. But Jesus knelt in the dust. He wrote with his finger, ignoring their rage. Then, he stood and dropped the sentence that dismantled the entire courtroom. Let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone. I heard the thud of dropping stones in my imagination. I saw the accusers leave. And then, the most shocking moment of all, Jesus, the Holy One, looking at the sinner and saying, "Neither do I condemn you." I wept into my pillow, muffling the sound. I had spent 20 years terrified of a single misstep. I lived in a world where reputation was glass one crack, and it was ruined forever. Yet here was a God who stood between the sinner and the stone. But the hardest hurdle was yet to come: the crucifixion. I turned the pages to the end of the Gospel. In Islam, we are taught the cross is a fiction. Allah would never allow his beloved prophet to suffer the humiliation of a criminal's death. It was a deception, a body double, a miracle of rescue. But the angel spared no detail. The whip, the thorns, the nails, the slow, suffocating agony. I read it with a knot in my stomach. Why? Why would God allow this? It seemed weak. It seemed like defeat. A God who bleeds, a God who dies. It made no sense. Then I read the words, "He spoke as he died, it is finished." Tetelestai, paid in full. The concept hit me with the force of a physical blow. All my life, I had envisioned my soul as a scale. On one side, my prayers, my fasting, my charity. On the other, my vanity, my lies, my secret doubts. I lived in terror that the bad side would tip the scale on Judgment Day. I was working, striving, sweating to earn a salvation that was always just out of reach. But Jesus wasn't asking for my work. He was offering his own. He hadn't died because he was weak. He had died because the price of my sin was too high for me to pay. He took the stones that were meant for me. I lay on my back, staring at the intricate plaster molding of my ceiling. The realization was a key turning in a lock I hadn't known existed. Grace, it wasn't a reward for the righteous. It was a gift for the broken. The next morning, the dissonance of my double life became unbearable. I sat across from Nasir at a coffee shop, a rare, chaperoned meeting to discuss the housing arrangements in Riyadh. He was talking about square footage and the proximity to his office. "It is a good neighborhood," he said, checking his phone. "Very respectable, private." I looked at him, this man who would soon own my life. He didn't know me. He didn't know that under my abaya, my heart was beating to the rhythm of a forbidden text. He didn't know that I was falling in love with a Jewish carpenter who died 2,000 years ago. "Layla," Nasir asked, his brow furrowing. "You are listening?" "Yes," I lied. "Respectable, private." I felt like I was splitting in two. The verses I had read the night before were burning in my mind. "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." I looked at Nasir, at the gold watch on his wrist, at the security guards standing by the door of the cafe. I looked at the invisible bars of the cage that had been built around me since birth. I was safe here, I was wealthy, I was honored, but I wasn't free. I realized with terrifying clarity that I was standing on the edge of a precipice. To step back was to return to the safety of the lie. To step forward was to lose everything. my family, my status, my home, maybe my life. I went home and stood by my window, looking out at the Red Sea. The water was black and endless. God, I whispered into the glass, if this is real, if you are who this book says you are, you have to catch me, because I am about to fall. The answer did not come immediately. For 3 days, the heavens were as silent as the grave. I went through the motions of my existence like a clockwork automaton. I attended a family gathering at my uncle's villa in Al-Hamra, sitting among the women on plush velvet cushions. They spoke of recipes, of servants, of the latest gossip from Riyadh. I smiled until my jaw ached, nodding at the right moments, while inside, I felt like a spy in enemy territory. Do you know, I wondered, looking at my aunt's serene face as she poured Arabic coffee, do you know that we might be wrong, or am I the only one drowning? Sunday night bled into Monday morning. The date was March 18th. The house was locked down for the night. The security gate secured. The alarms set. I lay in bed, staring at the shadows shifting across the ceiling, my heart heavy with a despair that felt physical. I had asked God to show me the truth, and He had given me silence. I felt foolish. I felt alone. I fell into a fitful sleep. Then, at 300 a.m., I woke up. There was no sound, no alarm, no breaking glass, no footstep in the hall. But I was wide awake, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The atmosphere in the room had changed. The air was no longer thin and cool. It was thick, heavy. It felt charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was the feeling of a thunderstorm seconds before the sky cracks open. But concentrated entirely within the 4 walls of my bedroom, I sat up, pulling the duvet to my chin, my eyes darting around the darkness. "Who is there?" I whispered. Silence, but not an empty silence. It was a living silence. I realized, with a jolt of primal instinct, that I was not alone. There was a presence in the room. It was massive, filling every corner, pressing against the furniture, pressing against me. Fear seized me, the instinctive fear of the creature in the presence of the Creator. I expected judgment. I expected the angel of death. I expected the wrath I had been warned about since I was a child. I curled my knees to my chest, waiting for the blow. But the blow never came. Instead, the heaviness shifted. It wasn't crushing me. It was holding me. The terrifying power in the room was not anger. It was love. It was a love so intense, so solid, that it felt hotter than fire. It washed over me, wave after wave, dismantling my defenses, melting the ice around my heart. It was a love that knew everything I had ever done, every lie, every vanity, every secret sin, and yet it stayed. Then I heard the voice. It did not come from the ceiling or the walls. It resonated inside the center of my being, clearer than any spoken word I had ever heard. Layla, just my name. But the way he said it, he didn't say it like a label. He said it like a definition. He said it like he had written it on the palm of his hand before the world began. "Who are you?" I sobbed into the darkness, tears streaming down my face. "I have loved you with an everlasting love." The words shattered me. For 20 years, I had tried to earn love. I had bought it with obedience. I had traded it for modesty. I had negotiated for it with prayers. But this was not earned. This was given. It was ancient, unshakable, and completely free. I knew who it was. It wasn't the distant, unknowable Allah of my theology classes. This was the shepherd who left the 99 to find the one. This was the father running down the road to meet the prodigal. This was Jesus. He was there, in a locked bedroom in Jeddah, defying every law of physics and every law of the kingdom to find a Saudi girl who was lost in the dark. I slid off the bed. My knees hit the carpet, not in the ritualized posture of Salah, but in the collapsed posture of total surrender. I buried my face in my hands, weeping uncontrollably. "Jesus!" I choked out. The name tasted like honey and iron. "I believe you. I didn't have a theological script. I just had a broken heart. I believe you are the Son of God. I believe you died for me. I believe you rose again. I took a jagged breath. I give you my life, all of it. I am yours. In that instant, something in the spiritual realm snapped. It felt like a physical weight, a coat of lead I hadn't realized I was wearing was ripped from my shoulders. The pressure in my chest, the constant, low-level anxiety that had hummed in my background for years, simply vanished. Gone. In its place rushed a peace that defied logic. It was a river of cool water in a parched land. I felt clean. I felt light. I felt new. I stayed on the floor for hours, bathed in that invisible warmth, whispering, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Outside, the sky began to turn the color of a bruised plum. The sun was rising over the Red Sea. Then the sound came, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. The call to Fajr prayer erupted from the mosque speakers down the street, echoing through the neighborhood. It was the sound that had governed my life since birth. It was the command to get up, to wash, to bow, to submit. For the first time in 20 years, I did not move. I sat on the floor, wrapped in the presence of Jesus, and listened to the call drift away on the wind. I didn't need to earn my standing with God anymore. The work was finished. I stood up and walked to the window. The first rays of gold were hitting the water. I was still in the same room. I was still in the same house. I was still betrothed to Nasir. I was still a woman in a country where my new faith was a crime punishable by death. But as I watched the sunrise, I smiled, a real, terrified, exhilarating smile. The cage was still there, but the door was wide open, and I had the keys. Klon Tieng An Jem Ti Chin. Here is Chapter 6, Part 2, Transformative Rewriting. Continued Chapter 6, The Actor on the Stage. The week following that night was a hallucination. I moved through the corridors of my life like a spy in a foreign court. To the outside world, nothing had shifted. I was still Layla, the quiet daughter, the blushing bride-to-be. I ate my breakfast of dates and yogurt. I sat for the henna artist as she painted vines of luck onto my palms. I nodded as my mother listed the guests for the wedding. But inside, I was vibrating with a secret so volatile I feared it might burn through my skin. I became a master of the double life. When the Adhan called, I stood in the line of women behind my grandmother. I bowed. I knelt. My forehead touched the prayer rug. But while my lips formed the Arabic words of the Salah, my heart was whispering a different language. Lord Jesus, I prayed into the weave of the carpet. Protect me. Guide me. Forgive me for this mask I must wear. The true test came on Friday. It is the holiest day, the crown of the week. My grandmother summoned the women of the extended family to the Majlis for a Quranic study circle. 15 women sat in a semicircle on silk cushions, the air heavy with rosewater and piety. Layla, my grandmother said, her voice cracking like a dry twig, recite for us. She pointed to Surah Al-Imran. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. It was the chapter that spoke of the family of Jesus, but denied his divinity. All eyes turned to me, my mother, hopeful, my aunts, critical, my grandmother, waiting for a mistake. My hands trembled as I opened the heavy, leather-bound book. I looked at the text I had memorized since childhood. The words swam. Panic rose in my throat, bitter and acidic. If I refused, it was suspicion. If I spoke, it felt like betrayal. I took a breath, closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, and visualized the face I had felt in my room. You know my heart, I told him silently. You know I am yours. I began to recite. My voice was steady, melodic, hitting the Tajweed rules perfectly. I was a performer giving the performance of my life. My grandmother nodded, her eyes closing in satisfaction, tapping her cane to the rhythm. They heard piety. I heard only the sound of my own survival. When it was over, I excused myself to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection. "Who are you?" the mirror asked. "I am a daughter of the king," I answered silently. "And I am in deep, deep trouble." By Tuesday, the isolation was suffocating me. I needed to speak the name of Jesus aloud to someone with skin on. I told my driver to take me to Al-Balad. When I walked into the shelter, the smell of dust and old tea felt like coming home. Miriam looked up from her paperwork. She saw it instantly. The change wasn't subtle. It was written in the set of my jaw, the light in my eyes. She stood up slowly. "Layla." I closed the door and locked it. Then I turned to her, and the dam broke. "He came," I whispered, the tears coming hot and fast. "Miriam, he came. At 3 years. The room was full of him. I gave him everything." Miriam didn't speak. She flew across the room and pulled me into an embrace that squeezed the air from my lungs. We stood there in that tiny, crumbling office, holding each other, sobbing. It was the first time I had ever been held by someone who truly knew me. "You are my sister," she said, pulling back to look at me, her face wet with tears. "You are not just a princess of this earth anymore. You are a daughter of the Most High." She sat me down and lowered her voice. "You cannot do this alone, Layla. You need a family, the real family." "I have you," I said. "You need the body," she corrected. "There are others. A few. We meet in secret. It is dangerous, but we need the bread and the fellowship." "Take me," I said without hesitation. I was starving. That Thursday night, I lied to my mother, a necessary sin that tasted like ash. I told her I was studying late with a friend. Miriam picked me up 2 blocks from the compound. We drove away from the glittering coast, away from the marble villas, into the industrial underbelly of Jeddah. The streets here were dark, lined with warehouses and auto repair shops. The air smelled of diesel and metal. It was a place where things were stored and forgotten. Miriam parked behind a nondescript concrete building. "Quietly," she signaled. We walked to a rusted metal door. She knocked a specific rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. The door groaned open. A man with a thick beard and kind, anxious eyes ushered us in. I stepped inside. It was a storage room, illuminated by a single, naked bulb hanging from a wire. The floor was stained concrete. There were oil drums in the corner. But on the floor, sitting on mismatched rugs, were 4 people: a Filipino nurse, an Indian laborer, an Egyptian engineer, a Sudanese man. They looked up. There was fear in their eyes at seeing a Saudi woman in an expensive abaya. I represented the authority that could have them deported or killed. "It is okay," Miriam whispered to the room. "She is one of us. Jesus has called her." The tension in the room evaporated, replaced by a warmth that no palace heating system could replicate. They made space for me on the rug. We didn't have a choir. We didn't have an organ. We whispered our songs so the neighbors wouldn't hear. We read from a battered Arabic Bible, passing it around like precious gold. The Sudanese man read from the Book of Acts, and all who believed were together and had all things in common. I looked around the circle. These people were strangers. They were foreigners. In the hierarchy of my country, they were invisible, servants, laborers. But in this room, under the yellow light of a cheap bulb, they were kings and queens. They were my true blood. For 2 hours, I forgot the wedding. I forgot the threats. I forgot the fear. I sat on the hard concrete and feasted. When it was time to leave, the group gathered around me. They didn't ask for my money or my influence. They laid their rough, working hands on my silk-covered shoulders and prayed. "Lord," the Filipino woman whispered, "give her courage. The storm is coming. Be her anchor." I drove home that night with the smell of diesel in my nose and a fire in my belly. I knew the woman was right. The storm was coming. The wedding was barely 8 weeks away. The collision between my 2 worlds was inevitable. But as the compound gates closed behind me, locking me back in, I touched the spot on my shoulder where their hands had rested. I was not alone. The warehouse became my university. Every Thursday, I slipped out of my gilded life and into the grime of the industrial district. I learned that prayer was not a recitation, but a conversation. I learned that grace was not a salary, but an inheritance. And I learned about baptism. It is a public declaration. The Sudanese man, whose name was Musa, explained one night he was a former imam, a man who had once led hundreds in prayer to Allah, now risking his life to teach 5 people about Jesus. It is a funeral, Layla. You go under the water to die. You rise to live. I looked at the oil stains on the concrete floor. A funeral. In my country, leaving Islam was already a death sentence. To be baptized was to sign the warrant myself. It was the ultimate line in the sand. But as I listened to Musa, a hunger grew in me. I didn't just want to believe in secret. I wanted to be marked. I wanted to bury the girl who was afraid. I want to do it, I said. The room went silent. Miriam squeezed my hand. Layla, the risk. If you are seen... I am already dead to them, I whispered. I might as well make it official. We waited for a moonless night. 3 weeks after I first knelt on my bedroom floor, we drove in 2 cars away from the city lights, past the resorts and the Coast Guard stations, deep into the empty stretch of desert coastline north of Jeddah. It was past midnight. The Red Sea was a vast, breathing abyss of darkness. The only light came from the explosion of stars overhead, the same stars that had guided the desert wanderers for millennia. We parked off the road, hidden by dunes. The silence was absolute, save for the rhythmic lap of water against the sand. It felt ancient here. This was the same sea God had split for Moses to save his people from Pharaoh. Now, I was asking him to part the waters for me. I stepped out of the car. I was wearing a simple black tunic and trousers. Clothes I could ruin. The wind was warm, carrying the heavy scent of salt and seaweed. Musa walked into the water first. He didn't look like a cleric in robes. He looked like a laborer in wet trousers. But in that moment, he held more authority than any sheikh in the Grand Mosque. I followed him. The water was tepid, swirling around my ankles, then my knees, then my waist. My heart hammered against my ribs not from fear of the police, but from the sheer magnitude of what was happening. The others stood on the shore, dark silhouettes against the dunes, watching, witnesses. Musa turned to face me. The water lapped at our chests. Layla bint Ahmed, he said, his voice low, carried only by the wind. Do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? I believe, I answered. My voice shook, but the words were iron. Do you believe he died for your sins and rose from the dead? I believe. Do you commit your life to him, to follow him, no matter the cost? I looked at the dark horizon. I thought of my father. I thought of the palace. I thought of the sword of the state. I do. Then I baptize you, Musa said, placing one hand behind my neck. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. He leaned me back. The world tilted, the stars blurred, then silence. The water closed over my face. For a second, I was suspended in the womb of the sea. The salt stung my eyes. The sound of the wind vanished. I was buried. The Layla who sought approval. The Layla who was empty. The Layla who was afraid she stayed under the water. Then, strong hands pulled me up. I broke the surface, gasping for air, water streaming from my hair, my eyes, my mouth. I coughed, laughing and crying at the same time. The air tasted sweet. The stars looked sharper. From the shore, I heard soft clapping. My family. I waded back to the sand, shivering now, my clothes heavy and clinging. Miriam wrapped a towel around me, her face glowing in the starlight. It is done, she whispered. Yes, it was done. I was a baptized follower of Jesus Christ. The seal was set. But as we drove back toward the lights of Jeddah, the euphoria began to settle into a cold, hard reality. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the city skyline approach the Kingdom Tower, piercing the sky like a needle. 2 months. The wedding was in 2 months. The invitations were printed. The banquet hall was booked. The dowry was paid. I looked at my hands. still sticky with salt water. I was a Christian woman now. I could not marry a Muslim man. I could not stand before an imam and vow to raise children in a faith I had left. I could not lie to Nasir, to my family, or to God. To marry him would be to put the chains back on. To marry him would be to spit on the grace I had just received. I closed my eyes. Jesus, I prayed. You parted the sea. Now you must move the mountain. I had to stop the wedding. I couldn't tell them the truth that would be suicide before I was ready. I needed a way out that would buy me time. A way to break the engagement without breaking my neck. I knew what I had to do. It would bring shame. It would bring wrath. It would lock me in my room. But I had no choice. I opened my eyes as we passed the security gates of my compound. I was entering the lion's den, but for the first time, I knew the Lion of Judah was walking in with me. 2 weeks after the water of the Red Sea washed over me, I set fire to my life. The meeting was arranged at a high-end cafe on Talia Street, a place of polished glass and imported Italian marble where the wealthy came to be seen being private. I sat in a booth toward the back, my hands folded on the table to hide their trembling. Nasir arrived 7 minutes late. He wore a crisp white thobe and a gutra perfectly starched, the very image of a successful ministry official. He sat down without smiling, checking his phone before looking at me. "This is unusual. Layla," he said, signaling a waiter. "We usually meet with your mother present. What is the emergency?" I looked at him, this stranger who held the deed to my future. He was not a monster. He was simply a man of his time and place, a man who viewed marriage as a merger of assets, not souls. "Nasir," I began, my voice sounding thin against the background noise of espresso machines and low conversation. "I cannot marry you." He paused, his hand hovering over the sugar packet. He blinked, once, slowly. "Excuse me, I am breaking the engagement," I said, forcing strength into my spine. "We are not compatible. We want different things. It would be a mistake for both of us." I did not mention Jesus. I did not mention the cross. I used the only language he might understand, the language of personal dissatisfaction. Nasir's face did not crumple in heartbreak. It hardened into granite. His ego had been struck, and the sound was deafening. A slow, dark flush crept up his neck. "Compatible," he hissed, leaning across the table. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You are talking like a child watching American movies. Marriage is not about compatibility. It is about family. It is about honor." "I cannot do it," I repeated. "Is there someone else?" The accusation shot out of him like a bullet. "Have you been talking to another man?" "No," I said firmly. "There is no man. There is only my conscience." He stood up abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. People turned to look. Nasir hated being looked at in this way. "You are a fool, Layla," he spat, adjusting his agal. "You are humiliating your father. You are humiliating me. And believe me, your father will hear of this before your driver even gets you home." He threw a banknote on the table and walked out, leaving me alone with the cold coffee and the ruin of my reputation. The drive back to the Al-Shati compound was the longest of my life. I sat in the back of the Lexus, watching the palm trees blur past, praying under my breath, "Lord, be my shield. Lord, give me words." When I walked through the front door, the silence in the house was heavy, suffocating. The air conditioning hummed, but the air felt stagnant. "In the majlis," the housekeeper whispered, refusing to meet my eyes. She knew. The walls in this house had ears. I walked to the formal sitting room. The heavy mahogany doors were open. Inside, the tribunal was waiting. My father sat in his high-backed chair, his face a mask of stone. My mother was on the sofa, clutching a handkerchief, her eyes red and swollen. My grandmother sat in the corner, her cane resting against her knee, her eyes like two pieces of flint. Khaled, my older brother, stood by the window, his arms crossed, radiating tension. I stood in the center of the Persian rug. I was 20 years old, but I felt 5. "Nasir called," my father said. His voice was terrifyingly quiet. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He possessed the absolute authority of a king in his own castle. "I know," I said. "He says you refused him. He says you spoke of incompatibility." He tasted the word like it was rotten meat. "Explain yourself." "I cannot marry him, Baba," I said, looking at the floor. "I do not love him. I do not feel it is right." My mother let out a sob. "Love, Layla. What is wrong with you? We have planned this for 6 months. The invitations, the shame, think of the shame." "You are being selfish," Khalid snapped from the window. "Do you know how much this damages our standing? Nasir is ministry. This was a strategic alliance." "I am not a strategy," I said, my voice shaking. "I am a person." My grandmother slammed her cane against the floor. Thud. "You are a daughter of this house," she croaked. "You are what we tell you to be. You have been reading too much on that internet. You have lost your modesty." My father stood up. The room shrank. "You will marry him," he stated. "I will call Nasir. I will tell him it was a moment of nerves, an illness. We will fix this." "No," I said. I looked up and met his eyes. "I will not marry him. If you force me, I will scream at the altar. I will shame you more." It was a bluff, but it was all I had. My father stared at me. For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, shock. Perhaps. He had never seen me disobey. I was the sweet one, the quiet one. "You are sick," he decided coldly. "Something has corrupted your mind." He walked toward me, extending his hand. "Give me your phone." I hesitated. My phone was my lifeline to Miriam, to the Bible app I had downloaded, to the outside world. "Now," I handed it to him. "And the laptop," he commanded Khaled. "Take it from her room." My father pocketed the phone. "You are confined to your room until you come to your senses. You will not leave this house. You will not speak to anyone. You will sit there and pray until you remember who you are." I looked at my mother, begging for help. She turned her face away, weeping into her hands. I walked up the marble stairs, my legs feeling like lead. I heard Khalid behind me. He followed me into my room, unplugged my laptop, and took the car keys from my dresser. "You are making a mistake, Layla," he said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Fix it before father does something worse." He walked out and closed the door. Click! The lock turned from the outside. I stood in the center of my beautiful, luxurious prison. I was cut off. No signal, no internet, no Miriam, no car. I should have been terrified, and I was. The walls felt like they were closing in. But then, I reached under my mattress. My fingers brushed the cool, smooth cover of the black notebook. They hadn't found it. They took the silicone chips and the glass screens, but they left the paper. I pulled out the gospel. I sat on the floor, right where I had met Jesus weeks ago. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "It's just you and me now." I was a prisoner in my father's house, but as I opened the book, I knew the truth. They had locked the door, but they had locked me in with the king. Time in confinement is a liquid thing. It loses its shape. Days bled into nights, marked only by the tray of cold food left outside my door and the click of the lock turning back into place. For 3 days, I was a ghost in my own home. My mother came once, weeping through the wood of the door, begging me to repent, to save the family's face, to just say the words. I sat on the other side, my back against the frame, tears streaming down my face, but I stayed silent. I could not give her what she wanted. The lie would choke me. I spent the hours reading the hidden gospel. I walked laps around my room, 4 paces to the window, 4 paces to the wardrobe. I prayed until my knees ached. "Lord, open a door," I whispered, "or give me the strength to break it down." On the 4th night, the silence was absolute. The house was asleep. I was lying in bed, staring at the moonlight slicing through the curtains. When I heard it, click, the lock tumbler slid back. I sat up, adrenaline flooding my veins. My father, a guard. Was this the moment they took me away? The door handle turned slowly. The door creaked open just enough to admit a sliver of hallway light. A figure slipped inside and closed the door softly, locking it again from the inside. Layla. It was a whisper, cracking with adolescence. Faisal, I hissed, scrambling out of bed. My younger brother stood in the center of the room. He was 17, tall and gangly. With the beginnings of a beard he was trying too hard to grow. He wore his school t-shirt and pajama pants. He looked terrified. "How did you get the key?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "I took it from Father's study," he murmured, his eyes darting to the door to ensure we hadn't been heard. "He thinks you are asleep. You shouldn't be here. If he finds you—" "I had to ask you," Faisal interrupted, stepping closer. His hands were shaking. "I had to know if it's because of the book." My blood froze. "What book?" Faisal reached into the waistband of his trousers and pulled out something wrapped in a cloth. He unfolded it. It wasn't my copy. It was his copy, or rather, a copy he had printed. Pages of computer paper, stapled together, wrinkled from being hidden. "No," he corrected himself, seeing my confusion. "I mean, I found yours, weeks ago. You left it under your pillow one morning when you went to the university. I was looking for a charger. It fell out." I stared at him, the room spinning. "You told Father?" "No." He shook his head violently. "I didn't tell anyone. I read it." He looked at me, his dark eyes wide and searching. "I read the sermon. Layla, I read about the blind man. I read about the empty tomb." He took a step closer, his voice trembling. "Is that why you won't marry Nasir? Is it because of him? Because of Jesus?" I looked at my brother. We had grown up in the same house, under the same rules, reciting the same prayers. I knew him as the boy who played video games and complained about math. I didn't know he was starving too. "Yes," I whispered. "I am a Christian. Faisal, I belong to Jesus." I waited for the recoil. I waited for him to call me kafir. Instead, tears welled up in his eyes and spilled over. He dropped to his knees on my Persian rug, the same rug where I had surrendered my life, and looked up at me with an expression of pure, desperate hope. "I think I believe too," he choked out. I fell to my knees beside him. "What?" "I have never felt it." "Layla," he whispered, the words rushing out like water from a broken dam. "The peace, the connection. In the mosque, I feel only fear. I feel like I am taking a test I am destined to fail. But when I read these pages, I feel like I can breathe." He held up the crumpled papers. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." "Layla, I'm so tired." Oh, Faisal." I pulled him into my arms. We held each other on the floor of my prison, two siblings shipwrecked in a sea of expectation, finding the same life raft. "He is real," I told him, holding his face in my hands. "He is here, right now." "What do I do?" he asked, wiping his eyes. "I don't know how to become one of them, one of us." "You just talk to him," I said. "He is not like the others. You don't need a ritual. You just give him your allegiance." There, in the dead of night, with the threat of our father sleeping down the hall, my 17-year-old brother bowed his head. He didn't pray in Arabic. He prayed in the clumsy, beautiful language of a heart breaking open. "Jesus," he whispered, "if you are the Son of God, save me. I believe you died for me. I don't want to be empty anymore." When he looked up, the fear in his eyes had been replaced by a familiar light. It was the same light I had seen in Miriam's eyes, the light of the resurrection. "We are in danger," I said, reality crashing back in. "Faisal, you must be careful. If they find out about you—" "I know," he said, standing up and tucking the papers back into his shirt. "But I am not alone now. We are a team. Listen to me." I grabbed his arm. "If something happens, if I have to leave, go to the shelter in Al-Balad. Ask for Miriam. Do you understand?" "You are leaving?" Panic flared in his eyes. "I don't know," I admitted. "But the wedding is coming. I cannot stop it. And I cannot stay." He nodded solemnly. He looked older than he had 10 minutes ago. He unlocked the door, checked the hallway, and looked back at me one last time. "Good night, sister," he whispered. "Good night, brother." He closed the door, the lock clicked. I was alone again. But as I lay back in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized the miracle that had just occurred. God had not just saved me, He was raiding my house. He was coming for my family. But the enemy does not give up ground without a fight. The peace of that night was the calm before the hurricane. 2 days later, the door would open again. And this time, it would not be a whisper. It would be an explosion. The end of my life as I knew it did not come with a bang. It came with the soft shh of slippers on marble. It was 2 days after Faisal's secret visit. The house was quiet in the mid-afternoon lull. The men were at work, the servants were resting. I was sitting at my desk, staring out the window at the distant haze of the Red Sea, my Bible tucked deep inside the bottom drawer of my bedside table, buried beneath a stack of old university notebooks. I had grown complacent. I thought the lock on my door was my protection, but I had forgotten that in this house, locks were for keeping me in, not for keeping authority out. My grandmother had a master key. The door swung open without a knock. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. She stood there, a small, formidable figure in black, her face set in a scowl of irritation. "My gray Shayla," she muttered, not even looking at me. "The laundry maid says she put it in your room by mistake." "I don't have it, grandmother," I said, standing up quickly. "Please, I will look for it later." She ignored me. To her, I was not a person with privacy. I was a room to be inspected. She walked to the wardrobe, rifling through the hangers. Nothing. She turned to the dresser. Nothing. Then she turned to the bedside table. "Grandmother, no." I took a step forward, but it was too late. She pulled the bottom drawer open. She shoved aside the physics notebooks. And there, stark and heavy against the white laminate, was the black journal. It didn't look like a Quran. It didn't look like a textbook. It looked like a secret. She reached in and pulled it out. Her hands, gnarled like old olive roots, trembled slightly. She opened the cover. The Arabic script of the Gospel of John stared up at her. In the beginning was the word I. I watched the color drain from her face. It went from the hue of tanned leather to the color of ash. She didn't read much, but she knew what this was. She knew the language of the infidels. She looked up at me. Her eyes were not angry, they were terrified. It was the look of someone seeing a venomous snake in a cradle. "This," she whispered. Then her voice rose to a shriek that tore through the silence of the house. "Ahmed Khaled." She began to scream my father's name over and over, clutching the book to her chest like evidence of a murder. "No, grandmother, please." I reached for her, but she struck me with her cane. A sharp, stinging blow across my forearm. "Don't touch me, filth murtad." The thundering of feet on the stairs sounded like an approaching army. My father burst into the room, his chest heaving, followed closely by my mother and Khaled. Even Faisal appeared in the doorway, his face pale as paper, his eyes wide with horror. I locked eyes with him for a split second. "Stay back." I pleaded silently. "Say nothing." "What is it?" my father demanded, looking from the screaming old woman to me. My grandmother thrust the book into his hands. Look what your daughter harbors in your house. Look what she brings upon us." My father looked at the book. He opened it. He read a line. He flipped a page. He read another. The silence that descended on the room was heavier than the sea. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of my lungs. My mother, seeing the look on his face, began to wail a high, keening sound of mourning. My father closed the book gently. He was a man of immense control. He did not throw it. He did not tear it. He held it in his hand, his knuckles white. He looked at me. His eyes were no longer the eyes of a father. They were the eyes of a judge looking at a stranger. "Layla," he said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "Are you a Christian?" The question hung in the air. I could lie. I could say it was curiosity. I could say I was studying it to refute it. I could say it belonged to someone else. It would save me. It would save my roof, my bed, my family. But then I felt it. The same warmth that had filled the room at 300 am. The presence. He was standing right beside me. Whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. I stopped shaking. I straightened my back. I looked at the man who had raised me, the man I loved and feared. Yes, I said. My voice was clear. I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God. I believe he died for my sins. I am a follower of Jesus. The explosion was immediate. My mother screamed, collapsing onto the floor, pulling at her hair. No, Layla. Take it back. Tell him you are lying. My grandmother spat at me. She is possessed. She is a devil. Khalid lunged forward, grabbing me by the shoulders and shaking me violently. Who did this to you? Who brainwashed you? Was it the Americans? Was it the internet? Khalid. My father's voice cracked like a whip. Release her. Khaled let go. Breathing hard, stepping back, my father walked up to me. He was close enough that I could smell his oud cologne, a scent that used to make me feel safe. Now it smelled like judgment. You have shamed this family, he said softly. You have betrayed your blood. You have betrayed your prophet. You have betrayed God. I have found the truth. Baba, I whispered, tears spilling from my eyes. I have found peace. Peace, he laughed, a short, bitter bark. You have brought hell into my home. He stepped back and looked at me with a cold, final detachment. It was the look one gives to a dead thing. You are no longer my daughter, he pronounced. The words hit me harder than the cane. They severed 20 years of history. I do not shelter apostates, he continued. I do not feed enemies of the faith. You have 24 hours. He turned his back to me. Pack your things. If you are still here tomorrow at sunset, I will hand you over to the authorities myself. And you know what the sentence is? Ahmed, no. My mother begged, clutching his thobe. She is your child. He pulled his garment free from her grasp. I have no daughter named Layla. She died today. He walked out of the room, still holding my Bible. Khaled glared at me with pure hatred, then turned and followed him. My grandmother muttered a curse and hobbled out. Only my mother remained on the floor, weeping, and Faisal in the doorway. My mother looked up at me, her eyes swollen. Why? She sobbed. Why would you do this to us? I love you, Mama, I cried, reaching for her. She flinched away from my touch. She scrambled to her feet and ran from the room, slamming the door behind her. I was left standing in the silence. I looked at Faisal. He was crying silently, his hand over his mouth to stifle the sound. He looked like he wanted to run to me, to fight for me. I shook my head slightly. No, survive, I told him with my eyes. Stay hidden, grow strong. He nodded, a barely perceptible dip of his chin, and then he closed the door. I was alone. I sat on the edge of my bed. I had lost my father. I had lost my mother. I had lost my home. I was an orphan in the city of my birth. But as the sun began to set, painting the room in blood-red light, I felt a strange supernatural resolve rising in my chest. I had lost the world, but I had kept my soul. I had 24 hours to run. The night before my exile was not spent in sleep. It was spent in the quiet, methodical dismantling of an identity. I opened a single suitcase on my bed. It looked like a gaping mouth waiting to swallow 20 years of history, but I fed it only scraps. I walked to my closet, a cavern of silk, velvet, and gold. I ran my fingers over the designer abayas, the French couture gowns, the handbags that cost more than a worker's yearly salary. They meant nothing. They were costumes for a play that had been canceled. I packed jeans. I packed t-shirts. I packed a sturdy pair of sneakers. I left the jewelry box untouched on the dresser. The diamonds, the emeralds, the heavy gold bangles given to me at my engagement, I left them all. They were the chains of Egypt, and I was heading for the wilderness. At 200, the door handle turned. I didn't flinch this time. Faisal slipped inside. He looked haggard, his eyes rimmed with red, his face pale in the dim light. He didn't speak, he just rushed to me and buried his face in my shoulder. He was taller than me now, but in that moment, he was a child again. "Take me with you," he sobbed, his body shaking. "Layla, please, I cannot stay here alone. I cannot pretend." My heart broke. I wanted to pack him in the suitcase. I wanted to grab his hand and run, but I knew the reality. I was an adult woman being cast out. He was a minor. The son, the heir. If I took him, it wouldn't be an escape, it would be a kidnapping. The police would hunt us down before we reached the airport. I pulled back and held his face, forcing him to look at me. "You have to stay. Faisal," I whispered, wiping his tears with my thumbs. "You are the light in this house now. You are the lampstand." "I'm afraid," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I know, but Jesus is with you. He is in this room. He is in the hallway. He is in the majlis." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a scrap of paper. On it, I had written a number. "This is Miriam," I said, pressing it into his palm and closing his fingers over it. "Memorize it, then destroy the paper. If you are in trouble, if you need to talk, call her. She will help you. She is our sister." He nodded, sniffing, and tucked the paper into his sock. "Be wise as a serpent, innocent as a dove." I quoted the verse we had read together. "Wait for your time, brother. It will come." We hugged one last time, a desperate, rib-crushing embrace. Then he turned and slipped out into the darkness, leaving me to face the dawn alone. The sun rose over Jeddah like a white-hot coin. The 24 hours were up. I zipped the suitcase. I put on a simple gray abaya and a black shayla. I took one last look at the room, the marble floors, the plush bed, the view of the sea. It was a beautiful cage. I walked downstairs. The house was silent. My father was not there to watch me leave. He had gone to his office, washing his hands of the deed. My mother was locked in her room. The servants made themselves invisible, sensing the shame that hung in the air like smoke. I walked out the front door. The heat hit me instantly, a physical wall of humidity. At the main gate, the security guard, a man who had smiled at me every day for 10 years, opened the pedestrian door without looking at me. He stared at the ground. I was persona non grata. I was a ghost. I stepped through the gate. The heavy metal clanged shut behind me. Click! The sound was final. I stood on the pavement, a princess with one suitcase, standing on the side of the road. A battered beige Toyota pulled up to the curb. The engine coughed and sputtered, a stark contrast to the silent, hermetically sealed luxury vehicles I was used to. The window rolled down. Miriam, her face was a mask of fierce determination. "Get in," she said. I threw my bag in the back and climbed into the passenger seat. As we pulled away, I didn't look back at the high walls of the compound. I looked forward, at the dusty road stretching out ahead. "We have to move fast," Miriam said, checking the rearview mirror. "Your father has let you go, but honor is a tricky thing. Anger can change minds quickly." She didn't take me to her apartment. That was the first place they would look if they changed their minds. Instead, she drove to a crowded, nondescript neighborhood in the north of the city. We stopped at an apartment block that smelled of cooking spices and laundry detergent. "This is the Hariri family," Miriam explained as we climbed the stairs. "Lebanese Christians, expats. They are part of the network." The door opened to reveal a woman with kind eyes and a flour-dusted apron. She didn't ask questions. She pulled me inside and locked the door. For 5 days, I lived in their spare room. I was a fugitive in my own city. I jumped at every siren. I stayed away from the windows. Miriam came and go, her face growing more serious with each visit. "You cannot stay in Saudi Arabia, Layla," she told me on the third night, sitting on the edge of the cot. "It is not just your family, it is the law. You are an apostate. If you are discovered, you could face the death penalty or indefinite imprisonment." "Where do I go?" I asked. "I have never traveled alone. My passport." "We have contacts," she said. "There are organizations that help believers in danger." 2 days later, she returned with a piece of paper. It was a flight itinerary. Jeddah to London Heathrow. London. I stared at the paper. I had been to London once, on a shopping trip with my mother, staying at the Dorchester, surrounded by bodyguards. You will claim asylum, Miriam said. Religious persecution. It will be hard. Layla, you will not be a tourist. You will be a refugee. Refugee. The word felt heavy, rough, and real. I don't care about the status, I said. I just want to be free to worship. The night of my departure, the small underground church gathered one last time at the safe house. Musa was there, and the others. They laid hands on me, weeping. You go for us, Musa prayed. You go where we cannot. Be a voice. Layla, shout from the rooftops what we whisper in the dark. Miriam drove me to King Abdulaziz International Airport at 4:00 a.m. The terminal was bright and freezing cold. I stood at the entrance, clutching my suitcase. Miriam held my face in her hands. You are brave, she said fiercely. Never forget who walks with you. I will never forget you, I choked out. I turned and walked toward the sliding doors. Every step was a battle against terror. I expected a hand on my shoulder. I expected an alarm. I expected my father to step out from behind a pillar. I reached the immigration counter. The officer took my passport. He looked at the photo. He looked at me. He typed something into his computer. The seconds stretched into hours. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Please, Jesus, blind their eyes. Open the door. Thud. The stamp hit the passport. He handed it back. Have a safe flight. I walked through the security gates. I walked down the jet bridge. I found my seat by the window. As the plane taxied down the runway, the engines roared to life, pushing me back into my seat. The wheels lifted off the tarmac. I looked down. The lights of Jeddah were spread out below me like a net of diamonds. The Corniche, the palaces, the mosques, the prison I had called home. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and wept. I cried for my mother. I cried for Faisal. I cried for the girl who used to live down there. But as the plane banked west, turning toward the Red Sea and the freedom beyond, the tears changed. They were no longer tears of grief. They were tears of cleansing. I was flying into the unknown. I had no money. I had no home. I had no family waiting for me. But as I looked at the clouds beneath me, silver in the moonlight, I felt lighter than air. I was poor, yet I possessed everything. I was free. London did not welcome me with gold. It welcomed me with gray. The plane descended through a thick woolen blanket of clouds, landing on a runway slick with rain. I stepped off the aircraft and into the terminal, shivering. The cold here was damp. It seeped into the bones. I walked toward the border control. In my previous life, this walk would have been escorted. There would have been a VIP lounge, a handler, a black Mercedes waiting at the curb. Now, I was just a woman in a denim jacket and a hijab, clutching a passport that felt like a ticking bomb. I stood in the queue for non-EU citizens. The line was long, a river of tired humanities students, tourists, workers, and people like me whose eyes darted around nervously. When I reached the officer, a stern woman with glasses, I handed over my document. Purpose of your visit, she asked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. I took a deep breath. This was the second time I would cross a line of no return. I am claiming asylum, I said. My voice was small, swallowed by the noise of the terminal. I am fleeing religious persecution. The woman stopped typing. Her eyes softened, just a fraction. She picked up a phone. The next few weeks were a blur of bureaucracy and fluorescent lights. I was processed. I was fingerprinted. I told my story to lawyers, to social workers, to officials who took notes with dispassionate faces. I dissected my life, laying out the trauma on a cold metal table for inspection. Yes, I am a convert. Yes, my family threatened me. No, I cannot go back. I was placed in a hostel for asylum seekers. My room was the size of my walk-in closet back in Jeddah. The walls were thin, peeling beige paint. The mattress was lumpy. The hallway smelled of bleach and boiled cabbage. I sat on the edge of the bed that first night, listening to the sirens of London wail outside. I had no money. I had no status. I was Layla, the refugee. And yet I slept like a baby. For the first time in 20 years, there was no lock on my door to keep me in. There was no expectation to perform. I was poor, cold, and utterly anonymous. It was glorious. I found a church in a converted warehouse in East London. It wasn't a cathedral of stone. It was a cathedral of sound. I walked in on a Sunday morning, hesitant, standing at the back. The music hit me like a physical wave. Electric guitars, drums, a choir of people who looked like the United Nations Africans, Caribbeans, Asians, white British, all singing at the top of their lungs. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. In Jeddah, we worshipped in whispers. We sang in the dark, terrified that a neighbor might hear a melody. Here, the worship was a roar. I stood there, tears streaming down my face. I saw a woman raising her hands in the air, eyes closed, face upturned. I had never seen such freedom. Slowly, tentatively, I lifted my own hands. I wasn't wearing an abaya. I wasn't hiding behind a locked door. Jesus, I shouted over the music. You are great. My voice joined the chorus. A single drop in an ocean of praise. I had lost a palace, but I had found a kingdom. Months passed. I moved into a small flat share with a Christian girl from Nigeria. I found part-time work. I learned to navigate the tube, to cook for myself, to budget for groceries, skills my mother would have laughed at. I grew. I devoured theology books like a starving woman at a banquet. I learned about the Trinity, about the history of the church, about the suffering of the saints. I realized my story was not unique. I was part of a lineage of people who had lost everything to gain the pearl of great price. But as my roots went down, a new conviction began to grow upward. I thought about Faisal. I thought about the thousands of secret believers in Saudi Arabia, hiding in their rooms, thinking they were alone. I thought about the women in the shelter in Al-Balad, trapped in a system that told them they were property. I was free, but they were not. One evening, over tea in our small kitchen, my roommate, Sadeh, looked at me. You have a fire in you, Layla, she said. You talk about your people with such pain. Why do you keep your story in this room? It is dangerous, I said, staring at my mug. If I speak publicly, my family will see it. The world will see it. There is no going back. You have already left, she said gently. But maybe you didn't just escape. Maybe you were sent. Her words echoed what Musa had said on the beach. Be a voice. I couldn't sleep that night. I wrestled with God. I am safe here. I argued. Why put a target on my back? Why humiliate my father further? You are the light of the world, the verse whispered in my mind. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. I realized that my silence was a form of selfishness. I was hoarding the hope I had found. The next morning, I borrowed a camera. I set it up in my small bedroom, facing the window where the gray London light filtered in. I didn't wear a disguise. I didn't blur my face. I wore a simple scarf loosely around my neck, my face fully visible. I hit record. The red light blinked. My name is Layla bint Ahmed Al-Mansour, I said to the lens, my voice shaking slightly. I am a Saudi princess, and I want to tell you how I lost everything to find the one thing that actually mattered. I spoke for 20 minutes. I told them about the emptiness. I told them about the bedroom at 3 a.m. I told them about the love of Jesus. I didn't do it for fame. I didn't do it for anger. I did it for the girl sitting on a marble floor in Riyadh or Jeddah or Mecca, wondering if anyone else felt the same hollow ache. I uploaded the video to YouTube. I titled it 20-Year-Old Saudi Princess I Found Jesus. I closed my laptop. I stared at the screen. I had just lit a beacon. I had no idea if anyone would see it, or if it would burn the house down. I went to make tea, leaving the digital world to spin on its own. I expected silence. I expected the video to drift into the vast digital ocean, unnoticed, perhaps watched by a handful of curious strangers. I went to work the next day at a small bookstore in Camden, shelving paperbacks and smelling of old dust and coffee. trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in my stomach. When I returned to the flat that evening, Saad was waiting for me at the door. Her eyes were wide, holding her phone like it was hot to the touch. "Layla," she breathed. "Have you looked?" "No," I said, kicking off my wet shoes. "I was afraid to." "Look." She turned the screen toward me. 2.1 million views. The number didn't make sense. It looked like a mistake, a glitch in the code. I blinked, but the number remained, ticking upward even as I watched. 2 100 450. 2 100 600. My face, my unveiled, unhidden face, was on screens in Jakarta, in Cairo, in Dearborn, in Riyadh. I opened my laptop with trembling hands. The notifications hit me like a sandstorm. Thousands of comments, thousands of emails. My inbox was a war zone. I began to read, and the world split into two. First came the fury. It was a wave of vitriol so hot I could feel the heat radiating from the screen. "Traitor. You have sold your soul for a British passport. Shame on your father. You should be silenced. If you were here, we would stone you ourselves." I saw my father's name mentioned. I saw people speculating about my family, posting photos of the compound in Jeddah. The shame I had feared was now global. I had taken the pristine reputation of the Al-Mansour name and dragged it through the mud. I felt a stab of guilt so sharp it nearly doubled me over. But then I scrolled down, buried beneath the anger. Like diamonds in the dirt, were the whispers. "I am watching this from a locked room in Tehran. I thought I was the only one. Thank you. I am a student in Mecca. I have been reading the Injil on my phone for 2 years. Your courage gives me hope. Sister, I am crying. I know that emptiness. Pray for me." I sat there for hours, weeping. Not for the hate I expected. I wept for the hidden ones, for the Faisals of the world. I wasn't just telling my story. I was holding up a mirror to thousands of souls who had been told they were insane for wanting Jesus. My phone buzzed with a message on an encrypted app. An unknown number. I opened it. There was no text, just a picture. It was a photo taken in the dark, grainy and blurred. It showed a hand holding a crumpled piece of paper with Miriam's number on it, and next to it, a thumb giving a thumbs up. Faisal, he had seen it. He knew I was safe, and he was still fighting. I pressed the phone to my chest and closed my eyes. Keep him safe, Lord. Keep them all safe. My life changed overnight. News outlets called. Journalists wanted the Princess Who Found Jesus headline. I had become a symbol. The bridge to my old life was not just burned, it was incinerated. I could never go home. I would never walk the Corniche again. I would never smell the oud of my father's majlis. But as I looked around my small, drafty flat in London, with its peeling wallpaper and the sound of rain against the window, I realized I didn't want the palace. I had traded marble for meaning. I had traded a crown of gold for a crown of life. I still work in the bookstore. I still take the tube. I am not wealthy. But every week, I sit in front of my camera. I answer the questions of the seekers. I read the Bible with women in Pakistan via video call. I mentor girls who have fled their homes with nothing but the clothes on their backs. I am Layla. I am a daughter of the king. And sometimes, in the quiet of the morning, when the London fog lifts and the sun breaks through, I think back to that moment in my bedroom in Jeddah, the moment the lock turned, not by a key, but by a voice. I have loved you with an everlasting love. It was worth it. Every tear, every loss, every mile. I found the treasure in the field, and I sold everything I had to buy it. And looking at the field now, full of harvest, full of hope, I know I got the better deal.